and share my screen. Let's see. Hang on.
Morning, sweetheart. Okay.
All right. So I know we're all here to talk about Sarah Thornton's book, 33 Artists and 3 Acts. I'm curious, did you all read it?
Yeah,
Get a chance to get through it, and if you liked it.
Yes.
Well. With reservation. I'll say this.
Yes, I did not finish it, but I will.
But y'all, I do not think that she is a Jane Goodall of the art world. I just don't, you know.
I read every bit of it, but I did not care for it.
Mm.
But she's conveying what her interviews portrayed, and I think that was honest.
Oh, and I think I'm glad that we read it. I just, you know, I just don't think I don't put her on Jane Goodall's par. But anyway, no, I think we need to know about what's going on. So for our own edification, glad that we had the experience. Wouldn't do it again.
Good. Well, well, let's dive in. Of course, for the book, she's going into artist studios and into their lives pretty deeply. She says, I see artist studios as private stages for the daily rehearsal of self-belief. She's interested in the nature of being a professional artist today. For her research, she spent 4 years flying thousands of miles to interview 130 artists in 14 countries on 5 continents. And she culled this down to 29 artists. And for those of you who finished to the end of the book, you know that the title is actually an homage to Gertrude Stein's 4 Saints and 3 Acts, which includes only 20 some saints and not 4, and well more than 3 acts. And the book is actually covers a period of time from her research to the time of writing, which was 2009 to 2013. So, you know, certainly from when she wrote the book to what's happening now in the art world, there's some similarities and some things have changed a bit too. Of course, out of the 29 artists she talks about, I can't cover them all today due to time, so I'm only going to explore a fraction of them. What she has done, which I think is really interesting and good, is that she's exploring a variety of artists that are at different points in their careers, from superstars that are completely self-sustaining to mid-career artists who rely on teaching or other jobs to support them, and artists that are working in a variety of traditional mediums such as painting and sculpture, photography, to artists that are more conceptually driven and working in areas such as performance. In addition to writing about artists, Thornton includes a lot of information about the art world, revealing the side of commodity and business, which I think is an interesting take, and I think that stems from her background in sociology, and also, as she states, she was a writer on the market for The Economist for several years. She divides the artist into 3 acts, and you can see I've written out here that she states the reasoning behind that as the themes that govern the book's 3 acts were a key influence on her choices. Politics, kinship, and craft are rubrics you might find shaping a classical anthropological tone. They are not typical of art criticism or art history, but I discovered they demarcate the ideological border that differentiates artists, non-artists, or real artists from unconvincing ones. I don't know about you guys, but I thought that there was a nice flow and rhythm to the book. I like how she transitions from chapter to chapter, scene to scene. She connects her subjects through the thread of language, tying together sometimes disparate or contradictory characters with a single thought that propels her story forward. For example, in scene 8 with Zhang Fanzi, she ends with the concept of magic, which then she picks up in scene 9 with Wengechi Mutu, or in scene 12 with Jeff Koons and his dealer Larry Gagosian discussing how often it is presumed that's lonely at the top, and of course neither of them are lonely. And then in scene 13, she opens with Ai Weiwei expounding on the idea of being lonely. So these are just a few examples, but they demonstrate how the author really weaves together the artists in a cohesive way while reinforcing the connections and the small nature of the art world. I did find, and I think maybe this is what some of you are reacting to, that the book is a little insidery. You know, she has a tendency to do some name dropping without explaining who all the players are. I know I've heard a lot of almost all of the artists and some of these other players, but this is my field. And so, you know, I should, but I wouldn't expect all of you to know all of these people. And unlike the book we discussed last month, Kimberly Drew's This Is What I Know About Art, Kimberly Drew, I think, used this device really effectively, encouraging people to go out and search out who these players are as a way of discovering them. And, you know, I think Thornton doesn't do that in the same way. She actually expects her readers to know who the people on the periphery are. And, you know, so in that sense, it makes the book feel like it's an insider book rather than for a general audience.
Oh, sorry. Got my mask on. I did walk. It was a quick walk.
Quick walk. Hey, Nora.
There's a museum Zoom I was listening to.
Hmm?
Hi.
Hey, I thought I heard some comments, but they didn't all come through. No? All right. Well, so getting a little deeper into the book, she asks all the artists the same question. What is an artist? It's really the underlying question driving all of her research. She brings in, as I said, these additional themes such as examining the art market and the support systems in place as well. And she's really investigating the ecology of the art world, which is, in a sense, a self-sustaining ecosystem. Here are some of the answers supplied by the artists that Thornton interviewed on what they think an artist is. Some that I particularly like are a tattletale or alarm raiser, which is Wengi Chimutu, a radical entrepreneur, which is Carroll Dunham, and being an artist is like being a bank worker, which is Beatrice Vilhese. What are some of your favorites? And did these answers fit into your ideas of what an artist actually is?
But thank you so much for showing this to us like this, because yes, I thought that was fascinating.
Liz, did it feel like all of these kind of fit into what your idea of what an artist is?
Oh, no, this was to me an eye-opener. Definitely an eye-opener, and lots of food for thought.
Mm-hmm. Anybody else have any thoughts about these phrases and how artists were describing themselves? And
it's interesting how you have close to each other. Artists should be the oxygen of society, and an artist is a myth. So sort of like the most ironic.
well, I can't take credit for that because I just put it into like a program and it kind of does it all for you. But yeah, I found it really fascinating when I was kind of going through and picking these out to see this wide array of how people self-identify themselves as artists and what they think their role is. And while it's a consistent theme throughout her book, doing it this way, it really came much more clear to me, as it did for you, Liz, seeing it in this kind of format, because some of these ideas were actually buried in some of her other text, I think, and I found it really fascinating.
In fact, probably one of the most interesting things to me was these answers from all the artists, because it certainly it opens up your mind to a lot of different ideas. It really does.
Yeah, absolutely. And, you know, it's interesting. In her introduction, she said that, you know, one of the artists that she has, you know, really admired and respected for so long didn't give the kind of consideration she wanted to have that self, you know, reflexive thinking about what an artist is. And he's like, well, an artist is somebody who makes art. And so she decided not to include him. So she really was looking for people to profile that had not just a pat answer.
I wanted to add to that Artists should be the oxygen of society, from Marina Abramovich. Right, okay.
Yes.
I quote, let's see, our society is in a mess of losing its spiritual center, she says. Artists should be the oxygen of society. The function of the artist in a disturbed society is to give awareness of the universe, to ask the right questions, to open consciousness and elevate the mind.
Mm-hmm.
I like that.
Yeah.
Yes, and tying on to that is individuals that speak for the group. And my takeaway was that artists have to have a lot of confidence, because a lot of their ideas to me seem very silly and almost narcissistic.
Well, yeah, and actually one of them says that being an artist is a narcissistic business. And
Yeah.
that may have been Ai Weiwei.
Yeah, I think it was.
But I liked him. I liked what he represented, and he did have a sense of humor, even though I don't think he realizes it.
Yeah, I think he actually does. I mean, but yeah. Well, anyway.
So as someone who actually sells art, like it is very narcissistic. You do have to kind of build your own personality, because it's not just the art itself that sells, it's your relationship with the customer. Like you do have to kind of cultivate a personality in order to attract people to buy your work. It's a weird thing that happens in art that doesn't really, I think, happen in other businesses, but they want a connection with the person. They don't want just something on their wall, because they can go to Walmart and get a poster. So when they're buying a piece, they are buying into you as an artist. So it is narcissistic, and you do have to have this kind of built up persona. And then also, like, it's very vulnerable work, so you need a bit of a shell as well.
Yeah, I think that's true. And I think you just brought up a really interesting point, that of the persona, which clearly is another theme that runs throughout this book. And we'll talk about that in a minute. As I mentioned, Thornton has 3 acts. The first is politics, which explores artists' ethics and their attitudes to power and responsibility, paying particular attention to human rights and freedom of speech. So she frames Act 1 primarily with 2 artists, Jeff Koons and Ai Weiwei. And she states, although the 2 artists share a love of Duchamp and a penchant for exploiting mass media, they have disparate responses to power. So let's start with Jeff Koons, who he is in many ways avowedly apolitical, until you think about the power of his market and the power of money. His works are highly reflective metal pieces that are extraordinarily expensive. But he's incredibly reticent to discuss his market with Thornton. When she questions him about his market and his politics, he states, I try to do things that are not harmful to my work. And she goes on to stipulate that overt political content put a damper on his success in stimulating desire. And I think that kind of goes back to sort of what Amy was just saying, that collectors want to get to know the artist, but he has built up a group of collectors that are buying Jeff Koons as much as they're buying his work. And so he's very smart and canny in keeping his politics to himself, as not to offend anybody who may want to spend millions and millions on one of his pieces. And again, as we were just talking about personas, Thornton throughout the book is fascinated with artist personas, as she believes the author of an artwork is part of its meaning. Koons seems more so than any of the other artists, I think, to perfected his persona. And in the past, he's admitted that he likes to be anyone that people want him to be. When she asks him directly about his persona, he replies, I can't say I'm not aware of certain things because I don't want to be naive, but I don't try to create something. I've always tried honestly to make the work, and I'm always trying to represent the work the way I see it. I'm not naive. There's a difference between importance and significance. Something repeated by the media can be important. We are conscious of it because of repetition, but significance is a higher realm. As she paints him, Koons really comes across as very slick and slippery and, really a product of his persona. You don't really ever get to see who the real Jeff Koons is. On the other hand, Chinese artist Ai Weiwei is much more upfront
I
about
am in the
his
basement
politics.
listening to the
He likes to
museum
shock and provoke.
book Zoom.
He's a former antique stealer, and one of his first well-known works, which I portrayed on the left, is dropping a Han Dynasty urn from 1995. It consists of 3 black and white photographs in which he holds, releases, and smashes a 2,000-year-old antique. The other image is discussed in the book. It is the sunflower seeds that was on view at the Tate Modern in their Turbine Hall. And of course, he employed, like Koons does, Koons employs many people in his studio. This actually, Ai Weiwei sort of farmed out the fabrication of this work, all of these sunflower seeds, and Thornton, it kind of comes up through the book with different artists who have picked up a piece here, and you know that she has taken a piece. And about this in all of his works, I states, I'm not one to explain my artworks. If you are interested, you can look at them. Every single work that I make has a basic connection to my most fundamental beliefs. And if the work can't express that belief, it's not worth making. So he's emulating Duchampian principles, and he feels like he can do many things, often with a political agenda, and still constitute it as art. He says that through Duchamp, he understood that art is a mental activity, an attitude, a lifestyle, that Duchamp gave him an excuse not to do too much. It was symbolic, that he could do something else and still think he was an artist. He goes on to explain that for me, being an artist is a total activity. I introduce many things like political argument and writing that were not considered art activities. So as you'll notice, there's so many artists and so many people that we could talk about that I'm hoping that if you haven't read the book that you will, because you'll get much more in depth on each of these artists. I'm just trying to pull together some works from each of them so that you can have a better reference point than just the black and white images in the book, and feel a little bit more about how she's drawing, Thornton is drawing all these threads together with these different artists. So here is Wenyi Chimutu, and she falls probably closer to I on the political scale. She does use her art to deal with social and political issues. She creates multimedia collages out of anything and everything, including linoleum, fabric, feathers, sparkles, powders, paint, magazine clippings, images she finds on the internet too. For her, materials have their own souls, their own chemical properties, gravities, and past lives. Mutu combines these disparate elements to create mysterious and exotic women-like creatures that address the politics of beauty. She loves collage because she finds it to be egalitarian in that it's a democratic art. Anybody can, put scraps of things together and create a collage, and people often do, not even thinking about it as art. She references birthday cards or other things that we make all the time and don't think of it as a piece of art, but it just, again, makes that playing field very level. Anybody can make a collage. She feels her work is really purposeful, and she's trying to expose things that are unjust or covered up. And she really feels that responsibility, kind of bringing that politics into her art. For her, she says about being an artist, that artists are individuals that speak for the group. We divulge the secrets of what's going on in the family, even if we're not supposed to. We're like a tattletale or an alarm raiser. She goes on to say, art allows you to imbue the truth with a sort of magic, so it can infiltrate the psyches of more people, including those who don't believe in the same things as you. So again, using art as a way to challenge us and make us think about things in perhaps a different way.
Just a little piece of a tomato if you want to make a tomato sandwich.
So a pioneering artist, Martha Rosler, really started making her mark in the 1970s. She's also very blatantly political in her work. In her seminal piece, Semiotics of the Kitchen, which is a video on the left here, she takes a feminist stance as she recontextualizes kitchen implements as instruments of violence. And I'm going to have us watch this a little bit of this, and I'll also fast forward a bit. The first 45 seconds or so, she's just holding a sign, so you're not really missing anything at the beginning. watch the entire thing. Hopefully it should work. There we go. So that's just a snippet. If people are interested, you can watch the rest of it on YouTube, or if we have time, we can always go back later. But she continues in this manner throughout the whole alphabet. And when she reaches the end with letters such as X, Y, and Z, and she can't really find the kitchen instruments that associate with those, she actually mimes them out, sort of, you know, Y, W, and sort of like an inverse of YMCA in the Village People. And you can see on the right, a piece from her series of photo collages, House Beautiful, Bringing the War Home. And here she's juxtaposing the atrocities of war in Vietnam with perfectly kept domestic interiors of affluent homes. That was known as the living room war, because it was one of the first times that news about the war was coming into everybody's home through the media, through television reports. And she is describing through these works and revealing how a collective experience of war was shaped by the media image. This is something that in some ways was so shocking then, and as a public now, we've become sort of, you know, inured to it, that we've been so bombarded with them, it doesn't have quite the same effect it once did. Rosler's idea of, and definition of what an artist is somebody whose sensibilities put a twist on the utterance in such a way that you recognize both its meaning and its composition. And in her discussion with Thornton about what a real artist is, and I say real artist, and Thornton has it in that way in her book, is in quotes, is that it's a subjective judgment masquerading as objectivity. Rosler equates being a, in quote, real artist with being serious and having internal standards. She also believes that an artist has the ability to persuade others that there is something in your work that will linger after the initial encounter. And in some ways, kind of echoing a little bit of what Weiwei Chimutu was saying. So the next act is an examination of kinship, which for Thornton investigates artists' relationships with their peers, muses, and supporters with an eye on competition, collaboration, and ultimately love. It's an exploration of the relationships, family relationships, relationships with dealers, with curators, collectors, and the community artists. In this act, Thornton talks to collaborative teams, as well as to married couple Laurie Simmons and Carroll Dunham, who are really at the heart of this act, along with other artists who discuss the importance of different relationships in their careers. She chose Simmons and Dunham because they're a couple who have found similar levels of success and recognition in their individual careers. And for the book, she also interviewed their daughters, Grace and Lena, who are pictured here with their parents, because they also have achieved success in the wider cultural field. Many of you will probably be familiar with Lena Dunham, who was the writer and actor of the HBO series Girls. And I think that Thornton also wanted to, you know, interview them as well to really talk about this family relationship dynamic. On this slide, I've pressed representations of their works. On the left, you have a Carroll Dunham piece, and this is actually probably a little less risque than many of her works, and certainly even the one that was discussed in the book. And then, of course, the Simmons piece is not from the Japanese love dolls, but is an outgrowth of that series that was discussed in the book. For both Simmons and Dunham, they have varying degrees of political content within their work. Dunham thinks political art is a bunch of crap. He states so explicitly, while Simmons sees her work much more broadly and deals with many feminist issues. Both the artists speak of communities, and in her From My Art shows how art can be a product of collaboration. I thought it'd be fun to watch the trailer. And if you'll notice in the beginning, she's actually collaborating with her daughter on part of this film as well. Let's see if I can get that started. Why is that not working? Yep. Sorry, I don't know why that's not working.
Huh.
Oh. Oops. Let's see if it's going that way. Sorry about that. We'll try watching it this way. Of course, when I practiced all this on a run through so smoothly. And now,
You know of another family like that where every member is an artist? Oh, is it working for you now?
There we go. Somehow. Don't hear it.
oh, now I think I'm seeing it double. Ah, so sorry.
Oh, there's some persons, a toilet. I see a toilet.
I'm there.
Where'd it go?
Okay.
Where we're at here.
So hopefully you could all see that. Hopefully that worked out. But again, you could see that there was a lot of collaboration involved to create that, and she was using that as a way to, I think as kind of exploring her experiences in the art world. I think in some ways it was very, autobiographical, creating that piece, even though it was a fictionalized account of how she works. And of course, here's another sort of somewhat tame piece by Carroll Dunham. And Dunham also talks about relationships. He is somebody who spoke very much about the support he's received from his gallery dealers. He states that as he's grown into his work, his sense of self and his role as an artist, he's realized just how much he loves art galleries and how intrinsic they are to his ability to do what he does. Certainly Thornton explores a little bit of his relationship with his dealer and a little bit of his dependency on his dealers too, as well as the trust relationship with the conservator that he had working on his paintings after they sustained damage during Hurricane Sandy. So in this next slide, we've got Maurizio Cattelan, and he is considered the trickster of the art world. His work uses humor and shock value. Thornton weaves his story in with those of two close friends and collaborators, curators Francesco Bonami and Massimiliano Gioni. On the left, you have America, which is an 18-karat gold toilet, which was on view at the Guggenheim Museum. It traveled to a palace museum in England, which, while it was on view, was unfortunately stolen last year, and it's still not been recovered and is probably likely to have been melted down into just pure gold. For Cattelan, this piece represents and is an expression of the excess of wealth in our country. And then on the right, you have a series of taxidermied horses, and they all, of course, have their heads in the wall. This is an installation shot from the retrospective that was held at the Foundation Byler in Basel, Switzerland, that Thornton talks about in her book. She both discussed it and visited it. Horses often symbolize power, but with their heads in the wall this way and symbolically removed, they're stripped of that power. Cattelan is somebody who found a lot of favor with many collectors, and that's mainly due to his relationships with some of these curators and later his dealer. Thornton weaves in their stories with scenes dedicated to Bonami and to Gioni, and in many ways their relationship to this artist extended well beyond professional ones. In particular, Gioni often stood in for Cattelan during public speaking engagements, kind of almost pretending to be him, not explicitly saying that he wasn't. By delving into these relationships, Thornton, through her narrative, illustrates how in the contemporary art world, there is an aspect of codependency and cooperation in reputation building. One of the only people working truly alone in her studio is Cindy Sherman. However, she again has a community of others around her, gallerists, curators, and artist friends, and in fact, they talk about this in the book. The jacket that the clown is wearing on the right with the name Cindy embroidered on it was actually given to Sherman by Laurie Simmons. On the left is an image from her Untitled film series, the body of work that brought Sherman on everyone's radar. And in all of her pieces, she's adopting different personas. Again, that idea of a persona coming through once again. And she's using herself as a blank canvas. According to Sherman, being an artist is a state of mind. You have to be really focused and constantly make sure that you have faith in yourself. I found it really interesting how Thornton described Sherman's solitary practice and then also her level of control and how her work is displayed. Again, she could probably go fit into the craft section at the end of the book. And there is a lot of slippage between the different artists and how they could fit into multiple categories. You know, Thornton is detailing the collaboration between curator and artist. And in this case, Sherman is clearly taking the lead in how she wants her works displayed in her show. With Rashid Johnson, Thornton explores the idea of kinship in another way. It's not necessarily kinship with others in the art world, but instead is with his experience in building kinship through personal experiences and relationships out of the art world. And that's reflected in his art. On the right, you have one of Johnson's shelf-like pieces, The Ritual, which resembles altars and celebrates African-American intellectual and creative achievements. In talking about another mirrored shelf piece to Thornton, Johnson explains, brotherhood suggests a monolithic Black experience. Intellectually, I don't embrace it, but emotionally, I strangely do. The perception of kinship can be exhilarating. On the right, for this double mirror image portrait, Johnson is exploring his kinship with those who have come before him and current events too. He sees the art world as an escape place where artist roles are in flux. he has said the artist functions as a time traveler, and that's really visible in this piece as he's simultaneously inhabiting both past and present. He's examining and redefining African-American identity in this image. It's, again, a double portrait. He's adopting a scholarly pose and holding a book in his hand. It's part of an ongoing series, the New Negro Escapist Social and Athletic Club. It's reminiscent in style to portraits by James Van Der Zee during the Harlem Renaissance of church groups and athletic societies. Here, Johnson is creating his own fictionalized club, but it's modeled after the Boule, an African-American secret society which was founded in 1904 in opposition to Marcus Garvey's Back to Africa movement. Johnson states, there is such a long history of movement and escapism for Black Americans. You have the movement from the North to the South after the Civil War, and again during the Industrial Revolution. Soon after, you have Marcus Garvey creating the Black Star Line and the Back to Africa movement. Sun Ra and the movement to Saturn follows that. More recently, you have the writer Paul Beatty suggesting in his brilliant work of fiction, The White Boy Shuffle, that all Black Americans should commit suicide to escape oppression. I'm intrigued by the group Boule, surrounded by all this movement, which would decide that staying put is the best strategy. It speaks to the strength and privilege they must have felt. Here, he's taking on that persona of a professor of critical theory, miscegenation, and astronomy, imbuing it with the respect of academia and referencing fraternity portraiture. He's definitely asking us to consider what being part of a club truly means, and he's exploring his identity through these various kinship links. So the last grouping of artists falls into the third act, that of craft. Thornton states this act is about artists' skills in all aspects of making artworks, from conception through execution to market strategies. Needless to say, an artist's work is not the isolated object, but the entire way they play their game. I find craft is harder to define and delineate. It's not as cut as dried as politics or kin. And I think here, Thornton explores the notion of craft very broadly to encompass not only the physical craft in making an art object, as she says, but also how artists are crafting those personas and their market strategies. It's about how they position themselves and their work within the art world. So Thornton's backbone of this act are two artists, Damien Hirst and Andrea Fraser. They're almost complete opposites. We'll explore Hirst first, who in some ways could have been also in the kinship act. In many ways, I find Hirst to be like Koons. Both have achieved some of the highest prices for their works of art, and both have employed assistants with the publication of their work. Additionally, they're both represented by Gagosian Gallery. So I find it interesting that Thornton has sort of bookended her narrative with these two artists. Hirst, however, does seem to be a little rougher around the edges. He's considered, known to be the bad boy of art, and in some ways more raw and perhaps more real than Koons, who's always unruffled and very polished. I've attached two images here. The first is a catalog cover of the auction catalog, Beautiful Inside My Head Forever, which was a sale at Sotheby's London on September 15th and 16th, 2008. As Thornton describes in her book, this was really notable for several reasons. First, it was the first time that an artist sold directly through auction on such a scale. To have a single artist auction with the number of works available, there were over 200, was unprecedented. This was, at first sight, maybe a usurping of the traditional art market system too. Normally, galleries are the primary market for artist material, whereas auction is dealing in the secondary market or selling pre-owned artworks. In this case, it does seem that Hirst's dealers were probably cut into the deal somehow. He steamrolled them into it, demonstrating not only the crafting of his market, but the power that this one artist held at the moment. The second thing to note was the amount of money the sale generated. It was held just 2 days after the public collapse of Lehman Brothers, which precipitated the 2008 financial crisis, yet it realized $198 million. The second image is from Hirst's Instagram. apparently Damien Hirst wanted desperately Maurizio Cattelan's piece Comedian, which was debuted to much attention at last year's Art Basel Miami Beach Art Fair. And it was made in an edition of 3. All 3 sold in varying prices from $120,000 to $150,000. And the owner of the work was committed to replacing the banana once a week in perpetuity. It's a simple banana just duct taped to the wall, and it was hotly debated as to whether it was art or not. Hirst made an offer to Cattelan, suggesting that in exchange for a version of Comedian, be it an artist proof or a new version, that Hirst would give Cattelan any work that Hirst had created and trade him for it, and Cattelan refused. After sharing his disappointment on Instagram, the curator Francesco Bonami felt sorry for Hirst, and of course we were introduced to him along with Cattelan earlier. And he sent him his own knockoff. So it's similar in every way, except for the banana is taped to the wall in a mirror image. So it's actually opposite of what the actual piece Comedian is. So again, all of these relationships between these people kind of demonstrate how small the art world is and the links between them. On the other hand, Andrea Fraser is political in both her work and her attitudes. Her feeling on the art market reflects that. And while Hirst takes advantage of the inequalities of the art world, Fraser chafes against them. She states, whether we're talking about cultural capital or economic capital, art benefits from inequality and the increasing unequal distribution of social power and privilege. The avant-garde has been trying to escape its own privilege for the last 100 years, but the art world is increasingly a winner-take-all market. Like Hirst, she consciously crafts her art market. However, again, she's taken a very different route. In fact, Fraser left her New York gallery, Frederick Petzel, because she didn't want to be involved with the commercial art economy of sales to ultra-high net worth private collectors, as she put it. Those that Hirst are courting, that's exactly who he's selling his work to. She continues, however, to be represented by Gallery Nagel Drexler in Cologne, but they will only sell to museums. So again, she is very heavily involved in the placement of her works. For her body of work, she has crafted herself in various artistic personas, like many of these other artists, which she's exploring through her videos. So in some ways, her persona is actually her art more so than some of these other artists. And I have stills here from 2 performances. She is credited with the term, coining the term institutional critique. And she's often investigating the institution of the artist in her performance pieces, as well as exploring their social roles and how she is responding to them. So again, a very self-aware artist. And sometimes she's admitting to her envy of other accolades and reception that other artists have received and the critical responses to their work. She states that she is an artist because I take a critical position toward the work. It's not about hope. It's about showing my disquiet for the dominant discord. She goes on to say, for me, being an artist is about having a relatively free space where I can engage, reflect, and investigate things I'm really concerned about. And then against these 2 figures, Thornton is discussing several other artists. I think she included Brazilian painter Beatriz Milhazes because of her devotion to her craft of painting. She focuses on creating the work, letting others deal with how she's positioned in the art world. Milhazes is interested in optical reactions and possibilities. She says, painting is my subject. I think all art is abstract. Sometimes my paintings refer to figurative things, but even my flowers are not so representational. They open the door for an eye experience. For her, painting creates her own world. Yet she's very pragmatic in creating her art and defining those romantic ideals of what an artist is. And I think, again, this is why Thornton probably included her. She says, I tell my friends I'm like a bank worker. I come to the studio 5 days a week and do my job. I pay attention to detail and I try not to make mistakes. I really like this because I think she is perfectly puncturing the myth of artists being inspired and working in a frenzy to realize their visions. Instead, artists need to really work consistently at their craft, and it's not at the whims of visions and bolts of inspiration. It is just this careful, considered dedication to their craft every day. The last artist we'll talk about today is Gabriel Orozco. Frank, I know you're excited to have him included here. And for those of you who are noticing, Frank, did you put back your image behind you? He's got another work of Orozco behind him, or did earlier. And Orozco is the only artist that Thornton substantially features in 2 separate acts, both politics and crafts. His work is very imbued with politics. You can see, and this is an example Thornton gave too, of Horses Running Endlessly, where he has crafted all of the pieces that are on the chessboard as knights. So here it's a social world where everybody is equal and there's not powerful queens or expendable pawns. He describes his work as in between the entertainment industry, big market powers, the spectacularization of politics and everyday life. It offers, I hope, some moments of intimacy with reality. Yet he's not naive to the power structures within the art market, stating, the artist is not in his bubble of the studio, rejecting all the forces of the market in a capitalist society. That is a romantic view. It's just not realistic. And as such, Thornton argues, artists need to craft how they handle their market by making decisions about how much art to make and where to show it. So there you have a very condensed version of 33 artists and 3 acts. But again, I think that the selection illuminates a lot of those overarching themes that she was interested in. What is an artist? How they construct personas? What is involved in really presenting their work and crafting their reception in the art world, and the relationships that it takes to do that, and how politics can be either a plus or it can be a detriment to certain artists' work. So I'm curious what your thoughts are, and if you have any questions or issues.
Some of this seems so much more compelling than others. It was kind of like just different experiences you would have in your life, but in this case with people and art. And sometimes I was just glued, and sometimes it's like, okay, what's next? What did you think of it?
You know, it's funny. I thought it was a little insidery, maybe. I thought that in some ways she paid so much attention to details that I didn't really need to know about, what exactly they're wearing, what they were eating, that became just sort of filler. But I did find it very interesting, like I said at the beginning, how artists perceive themselves and what they think their role is. And to see all those answers once putting it into that word kind of diagram helped coalesce those ideas. And, being an artist, I think has been, the myth of the artist has persisted for so long, and there is no one definition of an artist. And I think that that's what this book was good for, kind of showing that broad array of different approaches and what artists are doing to create their work. And, there's no apples to apples. Everything is sort of apples to oranges. And so in that way, I thought she did a good job in bringing things together. But I'm so curious who all of these 100 other artists that she interviewed were,
Well, and I wonder too if the gossipy tone that you keep referring to might have worked a little better when it was published than it does now.
Yeah, it could be. And you think about some of these artists, like we brought in Damien Hirst. Well, at that moment, his star was completely ascended. And now, certainly he's still relevant, but not in the same way, So I think that that's interesting too, how it sort of ages, this book.
I view it a little differently about the gossipy. I initially felt the same way when I started reading the book. I thought it was kind of gossipy. Mm-hmm. But then as we went along and she started interviewing the artist, I felt like she was getting a lot more out of their work than they really intended. I mean, Rashid Johnson was talking about, we had burned pieces of flooring, and she wanted to know if that was like the burned tattoos on the slaves. And he said, what? I never thought about that, Yeah. And there was another instance, I think it was with Carroll, father of the girls.
Yeah, Carroll Dunham.
Family. Yeah, that he was paying something about slavery or something, and he had no idea when she brought that up that was something. I never thought about that. He said,
Mm-hmm. But
So
I always think that's true. I mean, because we all bring our own thoughts and experience and emotions to our encounters with art. So an artist could never, I think, anticipate every reaction that somebody is going to have to their work and their own response to it. So, and I think it can be true of artists too, that there is almost a tunnel vision in what they want to portray, that sometimes they don't see some of these other layers that might be completely obvious or almost subconsciously entering into their work because they have such tunnel vision with how they want to proceed with it.
I also like the way she used words and metaphors. She was very clever, and I want to go back and reread it. I listened to it by Audible, which is a disadvantage if you want to stop and kind of digest what the words really mean. But I think it was Cindy Sherman she was interviewing, and Cindy Sherman was doing an exhibit at the Museum of Modern Art. I think it was in San Francisco. And she used the word for curators as intentional fallacies. Do you remember that? And I thought that was very clever. It was designed to, I think, irritate in a way, but also to add a little humor to the process.
Yeah.
But she was very clever in how she phrased and defined the world of art.
Can I ask a question, Jennifer? Have you read her other book, The 7 Days in the Art World? Has anybody read that one?
Yeah, I found it very well written. Again, it's a way with a turn of phrase that really good.
Okay, thanks.
Yes, we did that at book club too.
Yeah.
Don't remember.
I think it was the first year, wasn't it?
I think it might have been, or the very beginning of the second year. I'm not sure.
Okay.
And I agree that I just love her writing and the way she takes you somewhere. And it takes you somewhere and you stay for a little longer. Whether it's a studio or a paper or an art class.
Yeah. And also the city she was in, it was very interesting. I really wanted to go to that particular place after she talked about it.
I was interested in that artist, Marina Abramovich. Okay, sorry. That she spent 700 hours sitting in this museum. But the amazing thing to me was that people would sit across from her and actually cry. It must have been some really moving thing to go through.
Actually, from her because the line around music, and
I don't think she spoke the entire time, right? I don't think she spoke the entire time she sat in those chairs.
No, she did not. And like I said, the line just went, around the museum, and there was no real time limit for how long somebody could sit there across from her. So, sometimes a few people would, go in an hour, and it might not be for many hours before you would have a turn. So, I, decided that I didn't have a lot of time, so I came in and saw some of her exhibition. Didn't get behind that one on experience, but yeah, I don't know. I don't know how I would react to it. I think it brought up, again, like any piece of art, it depends on where you're coming from and your state of mind when you encounter it, as to whether it's something emotional or it's something that makes you feel really wonderful and elated. I think that piece probably was as much about the person sitting across from her than it was about her. I mean, in some ways, I think she was a blank slate, that their emotions were kind of being reflected back on them,
Right. That was interesting to me.
Any other thoughts or comments?
I have to admit, I probably like the gossipy ones the best. And what Frank was saying, of course, that she's compelling and thought-provoking too, but I kind of liked it when she was at the Biennale and her cell phone was ringing and she was running over here to meet this person and that person.
Yeah.
But
Well,
I did think about, again, as you said, the way this book is aged.
yeah. And, you know, I wouldn't necessarily say gossipy as much as sort of insidery. And she
Yeah.
positions herself as she was, as an insider. I mean, she had sort of unprecedented access to all of these artists and to these places that would be, I think, more difficult for another researcher to do in the span of time that she did. And a lot of that was because she is part of the kin, you know, section of the book. She has those relationships established, and as being the critic for The Economist and the person writing on the art market, she already, which really facilitated this book, I think.
Yeah, she knows the tastemakers of our world.
Yeah, absolutely.
Do you think this book could be like an expose of artists? Because she did get inside things that we would never know about if it weren't for this book. And maybe that was done purposely to expose them even more, because that's what they want, is that exposure.
I think in some way it's an expose, but not in the salacious way that expose, that term is usually used. I think going back to the root, exposing, I think that's what she's trying to do. She's trying to shed a light on different artists' practices and how an artist works in studio, who they are. I don't know that she's trying to, you know, give salacious details or create that kind of buzz. I mean, the art world is busy enough without her having to do that. There's always some kind of controversy, or, you know, artists know how to do that all on their own based on the work they're making if they want to court that kind of attention. So yeah, I think that was less of what she's doing. And I think part, you know, her background really is as a sociologist. And I think that definitely comes through. And I think that that's where there's that care in research, and why I would probably not necessarily, you know, attach the word gossipy to it. I think there are those gossipy elements, but I don't think that's her goal.
But I did get some negative connotation for some of the artists.
Yeah.
Yes.
I think, Barbara, you're right in that. I think what you're picking up on is that not all of these artists are her favorite artists by any means. I don't think she cherry-picked only artists that she thinks is brilliant. I think she was trying to be a little bit more balanced. And clearly, I don't think she's a fan of Jeff Koons. I mean, that's my take on it. So, you know, and I think that was like a running theme throughout the book, almost getting other artists to agree with her viewpoint. Like, oh yeah,
or readers to agree with
I find any artist that says they're not political to be highly suspect, and that's just on me.
Well, and Barbara, I mean, you raised such a good point that she is taking us places we could not go in a world that is very, very closed.
Yes, and from that point, it was very interesting. If you're interested in any of these artists, which I was, a few of them anyway.
I was too, Barbara. The one that I found really interesting was Christian Marclay, who sat there and went through 24 hours of time and clipping film pieces to match the time, and then to find out that he did a couple of others. I'd love to sit there, not through the whole thing, but at least see the ones he did on telephones and one he did on video clips. But that was great.
Yeah, he's one of my favorites.
Yeah, that was a fabulous chapter.
Well, we're a little over time here. If people don't have any other thoughts or questions, we'll say goodbye.
Thank you, Jennifer.
Hi,
Thank you all for coming.
Thank you, Jennifer.
Yes. See you next
Good night.
time.
Thank you, Jennifer.
Thank you, Jennifer.
Thank you.
Thank you.